Dremyolok. I don't like drama. It's the last direction I want my content to take. It's coarse, it's rough, it's irritating, and it gets everywhere. It's lazy, badly motivated, and toxic to the soul. But this shit is not okay. I wasn't going to say anything about this kerfluffle, but now I'm mad. So I'm going to do my part to signal boost the story and give these psychotic thieving bastards the middle finger. This situation is very high profile, so you've probably heard about it already, but just in case you haven't, I'll bring you guys up to speed. Mick Gordon is an Australian composer and an absolute genius. Everything he produces is solid gold. Mere mortals compose music with musical instruments. This divine being uses chainsaws and lawnmowers. If there is ever a rapture, God will commission Mick Gordon for the accompanying soundtrack. Suffice to say, I'm a fan. His legendary doom metal was a huge part of the success of Doom 2016, so of course they had to get him back for the sequel. There are very few games that I would consider perfect. Doom Eternal is one of those games. Its formula is flawless. It sucks you into a state of flow so easily. It makes you want to be good at it, and before you know it, you're playing out of your mind and you don't even recognize yourself. But behind the scenes, things were far from perfect. The first signs of trouble came when the game's OST was delayed a couple of weeks. When it was put out, people noticed that only a handful of tracks had mixing. The rest were merely sloppily pasted together game files that even a high schooler would have been embarrassed by. So, they got angry. The Doom Reddit was filled with posts demanding Mick be allowed to finish his work, since they assumed, it turns out rightly, that he wouldn't have been caught dead putting out such a shitty product. The backlash was so bad that Marty Stratton, the executive producer and certified piece of shit, who hereafter will be referred to as simply Dickbag, made a post that threw Mick squarely under the bus, blaming him for missing deadlines and being impossible to work with. People being people, they ate it right up, blamed Mick, and gave him a ton of shit. And I mean a ton. Mick's on record saying that Doom fans will burn your house down, and that seems to be accurate. There are some real psychos in that community. His reputation took a big hit too. I'm certain he's missed out on work over this. He's working on a game called Atomic Heart right now, a Russian title that seems to be one step above indie. It turns out that Mick's been quietly trying to resolve things behind the scenes ever since. He's finally admitted defeat and a week ago put out a manifesto that's the size of a goddamn novella. And he brought receipts. It has its own table of contents, is over 14,000 words long, and is over an hour in text-to-speech. I'm gonna do my best to distill it into a TLDR, but you should absolutely take the time to read the entire thing. Strap yourselves in. This gets wild. Problems began immediately upon signing on. First, they wanted him to deliver finished music for levels that hadn't even been designed yet. 2 levels per month. The game was still 2 years away from release and was being reiterated on constantly. His emails were regularly responded to a full week later, and all he had to go off of was basically just concept art. This resulted in much of Mick's work being rejected for not being a good enough fit for where the project was going. Make a note of this. So, Mick pitched a much more reasonable plan of writing some general reusable themes and motifs, getting the game's musical identity worked out first, and then building off of that to score for the levels once they became set in stone. Marty, the dickbag, baby-raged at him and tore him a new asshole for daring to have a reasonable suggestion. You know, standard executive behavior. So, Mick had to deal with working 18-hour days the entire time, constantly in crunch mode, constantly guessing with his compositions, constantly playing catch-up rewriting rejected music for the entire development cycle. Already, this is abusive as fuck, and we haven't even started yet. They cut him out of meetings, they started ignoring his emails, they became more and more aggressive despite being wholly to blame for the problems. They never even let him check how his music actually sounded in-game and what little of it was sketched out. And since payment was contingent upon final approval, which couldn't exactly be given this early on, he went nearly all of 2019 not seeing a single cent. Jesus Christ. Imagine working that hard for that long and not having anything to show for it. Disgusting, shameful, evil. They even rejected some music, then actually used it at QuakeCon, and then had the audacity to try and not pay the man for it. Mick actually had to call bullshit to get what he was owed. Id kept him in limbo, making him write and rewrite ad infinitum, and took every opportunity to dress the man down, as they did. Mick was essentially their whipping boy. Managers even regularly threatened legal action to keep him working. I think they got off on it. The game ended up being delayed until March. At this point, Mick had gone 10 months without pay and finally had enough. He asked for his money. They instead rejected another round of music, called him a ball ache, demanded one last round of rewrites, and threatened him again. Mick complied, seeing no other option, and was finally paid out at the end of November. That concluded his contribution to the game itself. 2 straight years of crunch for monsters that got off on putting him down. What an absolute shit show. By the end of this circle jerk from hell, Mick had submitted over twice what his contract had actually called for. The game launched in March 2020, and guess what? They used Every single bit of it. The circle jerk was a ploy to get more music out of Mick without having to pay for it. These people belong in jail. All of that was just for the in-game music, which, against all odds, was fucking stellar. Mick must have made some kind of dark bargain with the devil himself, because he somehow, someway managed to one-up 2016's music. I have no idea how he did it again in such a toxic environment. Mick Gordon is just built different. Now we get into the OST drama. This somehow gets even worse. Dickbag had the bright idea of announcing at E3 that the collector's edition of Doom Eternal would include Mick Gordon's original soundtrack. Now you can't just copy and paste for this when your game uses dynamic music. It's gotta be mixed and mastered properly to stand on its own. That takes a lot of work. Work that hadn't even been started. People expected something on the level of Doom 2016's incredible OST, and pre-orders came rushing in. This put the company at risk of running afoul of consumer protection laws, which, especially in the EU, are not a joke. Failing to deliver this promised content would open the door to refunds and class action lawsuits. I can't believe I'm about to say this, but apparently, Dickbag denied Mick the contract when he raised the issue. Again, this is criminal behavior. I believe that this was intentionally done to sabotage Mick and ruin his good name. Company be damned. He's that petty, as will become painfully obvious soon. Mick, obviously, didn't want his name tied to such an impending disaster. Dickbag was still stonewalling him out of spite, so he went around him and went straight to Bethesda, the parent company, to broker a deal in January of 2020. They happily provided him with the contract after 2 months of negotiations. Bethesda had actually screwed Mick previously, so he rightly didn't start working until the contract was finalized in March 2020, just a few days before the game was released. The deal was for 12 songs by April 16th, 29 days later. Bethesda promised him that an extension was possible to bait him into signing. This turned out to be a filthy rotten lie. Consumer protection laws could trigger as early as April 20th. Dickbag waited until 2 weeks before the due date to let Mick know this crucial piece of information, again by way of a not-so-veiled threat. He also revealed that Chad Mossholder had been working on his own version of the OST, taking Mick's work and sloppily pasting it together into a cacophony of noisy garbage to meet the company's obligation. Seriously, these edits sound like complete shit, and I refuse to believe that he doesn't know any better. I think this was intended to disrespect and smear Mick as much as possible. Mick had no choice but to watch his lovingly crafted tracks be placed next to these abominations. Chad was even credited in the album. I don't care if he was forced at gunpoint to do this, it's still a dick move, and he should be ashamed. Mick finished on time, barely, and was actually paid out without incident. I know, that's a shock after all this, isn't it? So, after the predictable backlash, Dickbag plays nice and baits Mick into a Skype call. This goes about as well as you'd expect, with abuse and threats galore. This guy's a real piece of work. After what must have been a tirade to make the devil blush, Dickbag pretended like he wanted to make a joint statement and make it right. Instead, he used information from this conversation to write his infamous Reddit post. This was essentially a demonstrably dishonest character assassination that placed all blame for the shitty product squarely on Mick. Knowing what we know now, reading this spiteful trash makes my blood boil. It's manipulative as hell. Mick takes it apart piece by piece at the end of his letter. He's got dates for emails, contracts, everything that reveals Dickbag's timeline for the lie that it is. For example, he's got the DocuSign for the OST contract dated at March 18th, whereas Dickbag says he started work on it all the way back in January. Additionally, metadata from the files Chad sent reveals that Chad started working on his anti-OST in August 2019. They never wanted Mick involved at all, and it was never an emergency situation. They just never imagined Mick would take it up the chain of command. 2 years of legal stalling tactics later, and here we are. Mick still really wants to give Eternal the OST it deserves, and has been trying to reach an agreement this entire time. But Dickbag refuses to recant his lies under any circumstances. He's cornered, and he knows it. His pettiness even extended to forcing Mick to take Eternal off of his website. And just in case you thought there was a word of truth to any of it, they offered to settle with Mick for a 6-figure sum tied to a gag order. Hush money, in exchange for passing the blame and unfairly slandering one of the most hardworking geniuses in the entire industry. It's quite clear at this point that this mess is not going to be resolved quietly, and putting it all out there was Mick's last remaining way to save his career. So, what needs to happen? First and foremost, Mick needs to be paid for the 2 hours and 24 minutes of stolen music that was used in Doom Eternal. No contractor in any field should even consider working with Bethesda until he is. That score is fucking incredible, and the man deserves what he is owed. Oh, and they stole his awards. Did I mention that? Yeah, give him those back too. Second, fire Marty Stratton. This man intentionally sabotages company projects to appease his ego. He is not there for id, or Bethesda, or the fans. He is there, first and foremost, for himself. He has revealed himself to be completely incapable of acting professionally. He is unfit to run so much as a lemonade stand, much less a AAA studio, and is quite clearly a liability. Find someone who isn't a malicious manchild. Third, recant this bullshit and give Mick a full apology. I promise you, talent is watching, talent is judging, and behaving like this is going to hurt your business. Man up and cut your losses before you close your doors. I'm certainly turned off of Doom by all this, and I highly doubt I'm alone. In summary, fuck you, Marty Stratton, and burn in hell. May the rest of you be blessed. See ya.